Sky means business.
Oh, that's right. I was going to tell you about a church that I heard about that deacons went and put one of them, hot air dryers in the bathrooms like they do, like they have in other places. They thought they'd save some money that way. After a couple of weeks, the pastor went over and took them out and threw them away. And so the deacons went to him the next week and said, "What in the world's the problem here? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, the problem is," he says, "that somebody put a sign on one of them last week, and it said, 'For a sample of this week's sermon, please push the button.'" Can't say as I blame him, Tell you what. Let me just welcome you to week number 3 of week number 4 of our series called the Frankenstein Principle. Not Frankenstein. Frankenstein, because of young Frankenstein. He said his name is Frankenstein, not Frankenstein, and it's Igor, not Igor. Anyway, if you've seen the movie, it's hilarious. And today we're just continuing in that series. And in this series, what we're doing is we're kind of taking we are taking an in-depth look at a particular story found in the first few verses of John chapter 3. It's the story about Nicodemus and Jesus. Nicodemus came to Jesus, and he came to Jesus at night because of his high position. He didn't want to be, look bad or all those kind of things in public, and to ask Jesus a very simple question: how to be saved. Want to know how to enter a relationship with God. How to get into heaven. And at first glance, Jesus' answer seems to be so simple and so down to earth and so easy to understand that no one should possibly have any problems understanding it whatsoever. However, as we've discovered over the last few weeks, this subject is much, much deeper than I could have possibly imagined. I mean, there's more to it than I ever thought possible. There's all kinds of stuff going on here. As a matter of fact, the more I look at this particular subject, the deeper it seems to get. And I'm going to have to quit somewhere. But, we're going to do this for 2 more weeks yet, because we got some really cool stuff to look at, some really cool stuff to see. And today we're going to start kind of a sub-series or whatever you call that within this, and I'm going to call it Replicate. And we're going to do that this Sunday and next Sunday, because we're going to be talking about that particular subject directly related to the Nicodemus story here in John chapter 3. So check this out.
Science has decoded the human genome, cloned mammals, and developed 375 strains of powdered cheese. But scientist Max Fleming is on the brink of solving the greatest mystery of all.
You have chosen wisely, my son.
Women.
Excuse me. Hi.
Kate was perfect.
Listen, I am a huge fan of genetics. I'm sorry, you guys probably get that all the time.
Not as much as you'd think.
Ah! Ow! She bit me!
Max made a big mistake.
Do you remember Kate, the modern science goddess from yesterday? Yeah. I cloned her. Her brain is perfect. It's like a sponge. We can make a woman who likes sports. Yeah, this way. Right? Oh, you mean make a woman who acts exactly like a man.
Get to the quarterback. Get in there and put him on his ass.
Replicate.
The perfect woman.
Yeah, the woman that acts exactly like a man. They find out that's not such a good thing after a while. But anyway. Okay, so here's what Jesus said. Jesus said, truly, truly, or he's not saying, listen, I'm telling you the truth this time. I haven't told you the truth before, but this is really the truth this time. That's not what this is. What he's saying is, here is an absolute. And I'm going to stop there, because anything more I add to that is going to mess it up. He says, here is an absolute. Okay? Here's an absolute. I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God. And here's what Nicodemus asked him in return. He said, can a man be born when he is old? He cannot enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born again. Can he? Well, those are questions, not comments. Those are questions. He's asking if this is what Jesus is talking about, if that's what he really means by what he had just said. Okay, so here's the critical difference between what most people think Nicodemus is asking and what he literally did ask. I mean, a lot of us have an idea of what Nicodemus is asking about, You know, we know what he's asking. Well, can I enter back into my mother's womb and be born again as a different person? But we need to understand what he's literally asking, what's really on his mind. The fact is, if you look at Nicodemus' question for what it really is, he has obviously understood Jesus to be speaking specifically of production. I know you're going to say, no, wait a minute, preacher. Don't you mean reproduction? I mean, no, I don't. As a matter of fact, no, I'm not talking about, and neither is Nicodemus. He's not talking about reproduction, you know, the reproductive process. He's not talking about that at all. On the other hand, Jesus is talking about reproduction. Nicodemus is talking about production. Jesus is talking about reproduction, okay? And so it sounds like it's backwards, you know. It may sound like it's backwards to a lot of us. You know, that maybe Nicodemus is the one talking about reproduction. No, he's not. He's talking about production. Because Nicodemus was talking about going back into his mother's womb and being born again for a second time physically. That's production, not reproduction. While Jesus, on the other hand, is talking about being born again in a totally different way, through a totally different means, through which we are literally born again of the Spirit of God, and that is reproduction. And we're going to get to that here in a couple of weeks, so hang on to that, because that's kind of where we're starting today, is looking at the difference between production and reproduction. Now, we all know what reproduction is. I mean, we look at that word. And yet, production, maybe when we add those two words together, well, I'm easily confused, but it seems to confuse me sometimes when I begin to look at it. So the vast majority of religions and denominations and all that kind of stuff, people today teach and believe that when you are born again, and this is where we need to start, because this is where we need to really get the best understanding of what's going on here. Most religions and denominations and people believe today that when you are born again, God takes you and he remakes you into a totally different person, a brand new person. But that's production, not reproduction. That's being born, not that born again thing. Okay, so in other words, what religion teaches is that God specifically takes you and he remakes you into something other or someone other than who you are. Now hold on to that, because that's an important thought. That God literally takes you and makes you into someone you are not. This is extra, won't cost you nothing. That's often what we do with our kids as parents. We often try to make our kids into something they are not. God has made them to be who they are. And as they grow up, we try to make them who we think they should be, or who we want them to be. We also do the same thing in marriage relationships a lot of times. One partner or the other thinks that, well, once I get married, then I can change that other person and they can be someone else. It don't work, people. You know that. And it doesn't work with your kids either. You can't make them be something they are not, because sooner or later they're going to come around to who they are, and they're going to be that person, whether you like it or not. And if you continue down that road as a parent, there's going to be a breakup. You know? They're not going to like you anymore. They're going to be a problem, right? So is that what happens when we are born again, that God takes us and remakes us into someone that we are not, somebody else? Well, no, he doesn't, as a matter of fact. And that whole idea or theory or belief or whatever you want to call it is the very same reason why so many people today think Christian and believer and non-believer alike, our world in general, including the religious world, which is backwards. If we're agreeing with the world, then there's got to be a problem, right? That's the way I look at it. If we're thinking the same thing the world is, then maybe we've got the problem. Believer and unbeliever alike believe, why so many people believe, that once you become a Christian, once you become a born-again believer in Jesus Christ, from that moment on, you're perfect. You don't ever sin again. You're a replicate of Jesus, a little Jesus Jr., right? That's what people think, is that that's what happens. However, if that's the case, then we've got a problem. We've got a real problem. Okay, so the fact that Jesus is using an earthly example to make a spiritual connection or illustration or whatever you want to call that, that also begs, in my mind, begs another question. Can God, and this is I'm not talking about a physical way, like Nicodemus, because we're kind of looking at Nicodemus' side. Like Nicodemus thought, well, you could go back into your mother's womb and come out again as a brand new, different person, remake you into somebody you're not. On the other side of that issue, can God enter a second time into you, into me, and make me into the person that He is? Can God make me into the person that He is? Or to put it another way, when I place my faith and my trust in Jesus Christ, does God produce Himself or His life within me? And the answer is no. God does not produce His life in me as though now I become Him. Sheldon just showed me this picture this morning. I hadn't seen it before. This is called Touchdown Jesus, you know. And there's lots and lots of pictures out there about this, you know. But it's the same kind of a thing, you know. You want to become like Jesus. So you say, now wait a minute. Aren't Christians supposed to be? Aren't we supposed to be little Jesuses, you know? A little Jesus Jr.? Well, no, absolutely not. We are not supposed to be Jesus Jr. Because there's only one Jesus, and I can guarantee you ain't Him. Well, neither am I. You know? And that's the very reason why the whole WWJD thing is a farce. What would Jesus do? Well, how would anybody know what would Jesus do in my specific situation in this day and in this time? Because not only is there no way, you know, for me or you to know what Jesus would do in any specific situation, but even if I did know, let's say that you could know what Jesus would do in a given specific situation, I ain't Jesus. Therefore, even when I do it, can I say that? Even there, when I do accomplish that, it's going to be different than what Jesus, than the way Jesus would do that. Why? Because I'm not Jesus, and neither are you. Okay. However, the vast majority of the religious world today believes and teaches that when you become a born-again believer in Jesus Christ, from that moment on, you are supposed to look, act, smell, eat like Jesus. That when you walk around the world, they think you're Jesus, man. You know, they see Jesus. You know, one of the things I've often heard preachers say in years past in a denominational setting with the old revival services. How many of you know what revival services are? Okay, most of you that do are probably closer to my age and probably been involved in religion in one way or another. It's that there was always a saying that was used or often used that went something like this. You know, I want to be so full of Jesus that when a mosquito bites me, he flies away singing, "There's power in the blood." You know? Well, you know, I got to tell you, you are never, ever again more full of Jesus than you were at the very moment that you placed your faith and your trust in Him, at the very moment that He entered you and gave you His life. You're never going to be more full of Jesus than you are at that time. So it's a very erroneous view that this same erroneous view is the same thing that the secular humanists teach, you know, and believe, that you are God. So act like it, right? You are Jesus. Now that you have His life within you, you are Him, so act like it, right? It's that same kind of an idea. Okay, so probably all of us are at least familiar with the account in the book of Genesis where Adam and Eve were tempted by Satan. We're at least familiar with that whole idea, that whole thing. And Satan tempted them to eat of this forbidden fruit. And the carrot that Satan dangled in front of their noses when God said, you know, God knows that in the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This is what Satan has said to them. This is the carrot that he dangles before their nose. For God knows that in the day, or at the moment that you eat from this forbidden fruit, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And there's been a lot of stuff said about that verse. A lot of sermons preached, a lot of theories, a lot of theology built on that, all those kind of things. But that really got me to wondering, specifically related to the Nicodemus story. What did he mean? What did Satan mean when he said, you will be like God? Directly related to the Nicodemus story, where we are often taught and often think that we're supposed to become little Jesus Juniors, a little replicate of Jesus. And what I found when I began to kind of dive into this verse and in this subject is that the first word that Satan uses for God in this verse is speaking of God himself. For God knows, and that's the word, you may have already heard that word, Elohim. Some of you, if you've been raised in religious setting, you probably have heard that word at some time or another. I think that's been used in songs and different kind of things, you know, praise and worship songs, those kind of things. And you probably already guessed that he's talking about God himself. As a matter of fact, the original Hebrew word there that's used is that, like I said, that word Elohim, or however you want to say it. And it's the word for God, and specifically the Trinity, the Godhead. That's what I've heard in the past. That's the word I've heard, the phrase I've heard. God the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the Godhead, the Trinity. So what about the second word that Satan uses for God here? That was my interest. If Satan says, for God knows, and then he says, well, then you can be like God. Is he using a different word for God there? What do you think? I didn't know either. And what I found out is it's exactly the same word. He is specifically saying, yes, you can be like God or as God, God himself. Except that the second word God has that little preposition before it, which means like or as, or however you want to translate that. So you can be like the triune God or as the triune God. Okay? So the question is, again, what exactly is Satan tempting Adam and Eve with here? I'm going to give you several possibilities, because and there's more possibilities than this, but there's several I'm going to give you here today, and we're going to end with the one that I think is probably the answer. One possibility is that Satan may simply be saying to them they could become like God in the same sense that they would know the difference between good and evil, which is specifically the essence of deity, knowing the difference between good and evil. In other words, Satan may be simply saying to them something like, sure, we all know, I agree with you. It's a fact. God is good in every sense of the word. But God also knows what is evil, right? Now, and all you've experienced, talking to Adam and Eve, all you've experienced is the good. You don't know what the evil is like, right? So wouldn't you like to be like God and at least know what it's like on the other side of the fence? Okay, that's a possibility. Because I think that idea, and I'm not discounting any of these, but that idea I think is a lot of the same kind of thing we face in our lives today, that we can at least know what we've been missing. We all like to know what we've been missing. We've got to be missing out on something. So, we don't want to know what we're missing. We want to know what we're missing out on. Let's experience it, right? Okay. In other words, we all seem to want to touch the stove. When you're growing up, Mama says, the stove's hot, don't touch it. Well, first thing we do is when Mama's not there, or even if she is there, we got to touch it to find out. It reminds me when I was, this extra again won't cost you nothing. When I was real little, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I have very, very, very few memories of my childhood, like a lot of us guys do. But that's one that sticks with me because there was lived in a very, very, very microscopic town in Nebraska when I was real little, and there was the Nelms grocery store down on the corner, which there was a grocery store and a co-op where you got your gas. That's all that was in town. That was it. And when you go into the Nelms grocery store, they had this lineup of those big freezers, you know, the big open freezers. They still kind of have them today, but they were a lot different back then. And one of those freezers, when you touched it, it had a short in it, and it'd buzz you, you know. And I'd go in there with Dad, you know, and we go over to that freezer, and I'd touch that freezer, and I'd laugh. That was so much fun, man. It was cool, you know. And every time I go in there, I drag Dad over there. Come on, Dad, we got to go over there. You know, I touch the freezer again. Same kind of thing. We all want to know what it's like on the other side. Dad could have said, don't touch that freezer, it'll bite you. You know, like touching the electric fence. You ever touch the electric fence? Yeah. Yeah, it's fun too, isn't it? It'll make you jump whether you want to or not. Phew. Yeah. So we all want to know, what really is hot, you know? We want to see for ourselves, is it really hot? We want to drive too fast, you know, we want to do all the things that we really like to do. You know, the Trisha Yearwood song that goes something like, well, here's the words to that one, I kind of like it. Everything in moderation, that's the way it's always been. Never getting out of control, never hanging out, always reeling it in. I saved my money for a rainy day, but now I've had enough of playing it safe. I want to go too far, I want to go too fast. Somebody draw the line so I can blow right past. I want to spend too much. I want to stay too late. I'm going to roar too loud. I'm going to be that way. I want to play too hard. I want to go too fast. Well, you know, when you get in the car, especially as a teenage boy, that's the first thing you want to do. Get on your motorcycle. First thing you want, let's see how fast this sucker will go. You know, may not be safe, but that's what you got to do. By the way, I think you all are past due for a reminder at this point. You know, when it comes to being good, you know, being like Jesus, you just got to know, I'm the one here that's paid to be good. Y'all are the ones that's good for nothing. Just need to keep that reminder out there, you know. So maybe Satan is simply appealing to Adam and Eve's desire to experience everything in life, to know what it really is like to be on the other side of the fence, know what evil is like. Okay, so another possibility, maybe Satan is trying to make them believe that there are lots of other little g gods out there, right? That just because this God says he's the only one, do you really want to believe that? You know? Yeah, he's the one I'm feuding, Satan says, yeah, he's the one I'm feuding with right now. But you know, there's lots of other gods out there. And you can be God yourself, too. You can be like God yourself. There are religions in the world that teach that today, you know, that there's other gods out there and that you can be a god yourself. You can become a god. As a matter of fact, the Mormon religion is built on the premise that you can become a god. That's its whole basis right there, that you can become a god. However, I believe that there may be a third possibility that is even more insidious than the others I've just mentioned. As a matter of fact, after studying this conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus, specifically, I'm fairly certain, I am, in my mind, I'm fairly certain that the temptation which Satan laid before Adam and Eve may be much different than what we might have ever expected. Probably much different than any of you have ever thought about or heard before. The fact that both of the Hebrew words that are used there for God, Elohim, are translated literally God, to be like God himself in Genesis 3:5, exactly the same word. That tells me that Satan is intended for them to feel like they could not just become a god, or even the God of their own life, you know, where you do your own thing, as some like to insist. but instead that they could literally become like God himself. Hold on to that. More specifically, that they could become literally a replicate of God, a Jesus Jr. I think that may be what Satan is really putting before them at this point, is he's telling them, listen, you can become a Jesus Jr. You can become a replicate of Jesus. Okay. So I think here's the point. I believe that's specifically the point that Jesus is trying to make to help Nicodemus to understand. So here, I'm going to try to make this connection for you. Hopefully I can make it clear enough where everything I've said up to this point will make sense. That, that the specific point Jesus is trying to help Nicodemus understand here is that Jesus is actually confirming the fact that when we receive his life within us, we do not become replicates of Jesus. I think Jesus is specifically saying you do not become a Jesus Jr. That's not who you are. Like many people and religions and even the world wants us to believe. Instead, we are literally born again of the Spirit of God as a brand new spiritual creation in him, through which Jesus lives out his life in a way that is totally different and completely unique from every other believer on earth. Did that make sense? No. That when we are born again of the Spirit of God, okay, let me put it this way. Because you are a unique individual. Got that so far? And because you do not enter again physically into your mother's womb and be born again as a totally different person, meaning personality, gifts, talents, abilities, all those things. No, you retain all of those things because that's who you are, and God is not trying to make you somebody you are not. Okay? So since God is not trying to make you somebody you are not, then when we are born again of the Spirit of God, God uses you as a totally unique individual to carry out his will and to do what he desires through you in this world. Which means that the way you live your Christian life is going to be totally different than the way I live mine. And that goes for every single one of us. There is no way that you can replicate your life to be like me or like Jesus. So don't even try. It's like trying to make your kids somebody they're not. God is not trying to make you somebody you're not. He made you the way you are because he wants you to be that way. That's who he made you to be. And for me, that's really awesome news, you know? It really is, because for many, many years, I tried to become a Jesus Jr. Anybody else here like that? I hope I'm not alone. Thank you. I appreciate it. You can put that hand down. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Some of you got that because you've been in church before. Dag nabbit. I've always tried to be a little Jesus Jr., and I've always failed miserably. And now I know why. Because Jesus is telling Nicodemus, no, no, you do not become a different person. Your personality is not changed. Your gifts and your talents and abilities and interests are the same. It's just that now they go in a different direction. Because once you are born again of the Spirit of God, then we allow him to guide our gifts, talents, abilities, interests in his way. Make sense? I hope so. God is awesome. You can be you and still be a Christian. Awesome. Lord bless you all.